This is a presentation of Northeast Streaming Sports. You're listening to TGI Sports Talk with your host, Keith Angle, on Northeast Streaming Sports.
Good evening, everybody. Keith Angle for TGI Sports Talk's College Football Huddle. I hope everybody's doing well tonight. Lots to talk about. We'll dive into last week's winners and losers, and more than just games, winners and losers in general. We'll talk about the big games this week, some movers and shakers in the top 25. We'll go around some of the conferences. We'll talk about some of the coaches who got fired. More coaches getting fired in Power 5 conferences during the season than is normal, and probably more on the way. We'll talk about some of that, maybe some potential replacements for some of those coaches. As Paul Chryst at Wisconsin, to me, was a shocker this week. I know they're having a bit of a down period, but Paul Chryst has been very successful. So lots going on behind the scenes there. We'll also talk about some of the big games to keep an eye out for this week. As Alan Perales, I'm sure, will point out tonight, ESPN Game Day visiting Lawrence, Kansas for the first time ever, as Kansas will lose at home to TCU. Just a little prediction. Guys, welcome to everybody watching on Facebook, Twitter, YouTube. We'll be on Roku. This show will be on Roku tomorrow at 11:30, on Friday at 11:30 a.m., and we'll repeat it on TGI Sports Talk a few times as well. I just got to make a quick editorial comment. I don't normally do this because I've got pretty thick skin. You know, I don't get offended by stuff, and I'm not offended by this. But I don't understand some bad actors out there. So I do a weekly Patriots recap, and I post it to several groups. And the groups, guys, these groups are very, very accommodating, and most of them are very appreciative of the content that I put up there. I don't pretend to be, the most polished broadcaster out there in the world, guys. This isn't my profession. This is not my vocation. It's my avocation. And I do it for fun, and I do it to hopefully entertain a little bit. Like back and forth to you guys is fun. And I had a guy, when I put my Patriot recap up on one of the Patriot sites, this guy I don't think is a Patriots fan even. He's in Jacksonville, Florida, and his page is full of pictures of him in Jacksonville Jaguar attire. And his name is, just because I want to call somebody out today, and I hope he sees his show tonight, Lawrence Boydston. Lawrence, if you don't like the content, that's great. But, to kind of put the demeaning comments you put up about, and I let this stuff pass, but it just struck me the wrong way the other day. And I got into a back and forth with him because, nobody's paying me to put this content out there. I don't do it for self-gratification. I do it because I have fun doing it. Do I like posting it to the group so that some other people can view it and I can get some feedback on the shows? But there was no constructive criticism in Lawrence's comments. And guys, to me, I don't go out and just berate. There's probably 1 million people doing these podcasts like I do today. Some of them have illusions of grandeur, I suppose, and think they're going to make it in the big time. I don't do that. I'm here to have fun, kibitz with you guys back and forth, and I enjoy it. The trolls out there, for anybody who's trolling, have a good time, have at it. Am I offended by Lawrence's comments? No. I'm saddened for him. As I told him, I don't know how to keep up with his certainly pleasant attitude and demeanor I wouldn't know how to appeal to a person like that, and I will not even try. So I just want to, if Lawrence should see this show, he may not, because God knows what groups he belongs to, because what he's doing in Patriots Nation or whatever the group it was that I posted it to, when he's a Jacksonville Jaguar fan, is beyond me. In any event, I'm a no talent hack, and that's fine. I appreciate the constant criticism, or the constructive criticism. I don't pretend to have any talent, and I don't pretend not to be a hack. I'm here having some fun. So Lawrence, enjoy your night, and I would challenge you to come out and do this, and not make a total fool of yourself. And I do some nights, but I have fun doing it. So sorry for allowing myself that. A moment of self-indulgence, if you will. But let's get on with the show here. I do appreciate all the groups, because there are hundreds of groups that allow me to share different content with them, whether it's college sites, whether it's conference on the college side, conferences, specific conferences, Major League Baseball sites, all the sports. And I put up stuff that's relevant to them, and they're very appreciative of it. Guys who run some really, really good groups have thanked me for my content. And look, I'm not looking for a pat on the back. I'm not looking for some kind of self-assurance or assurances that what I'm doing is worthwhile. What I'm doing is fun for me. So anyway, Lawrence, you could have come across with a little bit better constructive criticism. And maybe if your life is that empty that all you need to do is bash guys like me, then I hope I gave you some pleasure that day going back and forth with you for a while. Maybe we can do it again, because I enjoyed it. Anyway, I apologize, guys. That was not my intent tonight, but I had just seen another comment from him. So good morning. Good evening, Dave Guyette. See, that's what the problem is. I don't even know what time of day it is. Good evening, Dave Guyette. Alan, how are you, buddy? Good to see you. I just mentioned Lawrence, Kansas, which we'll probably talk about a few times. Dave Guyette, yes, Syracuse is playing very well, 5-0. They did beat Wagner last week, so not a lot to get excited about there, though. But Dino Babers' team is playing very well. I think Dino Babers has probably played him. His team has played him off the hot seat there at Syracuse. Interestingly enough, in that Syracuse game, we'll get into some more important stuff here in a minute, but I don't know why. I was reading an article today about, it was really the article was about James Madison and not being bowl eligible this year because it's a transition year for them into the FBS. And they alluded to the fact that, the NCAA and conferences and schools are not above, adjusting rules when they don't fit their agenda. It turns out, I'm not sure if it had to do because they wanted to shorten the game so people didn't get hurt and it was a blowout, but they played the second half. The third and fourth quarters were 10 minutes with a running clock on Saturday. This is the first I'd heard of this. So if anybody's got any information on this, I'd love to know what the heck is going on. Good evening to Neil Bush, who's been a very, very solid contributor to this show and even the Sunday Stream of Consciousness as well. So welcome, Neil. Todd Monken is a good fit for Georgia Tech. I would say that's a possibility. They want Deion badly. And if they want to make a splash for a name, that's where they'll go. Probably Monken would be a better I'd like to see it be Jeff Monken, but I don't know that that's going to happen either. But I don't think they're going to want to go from where they are now to another guy who's running an option offense. But I think Jeff Monken could change his game. But Todd Monken is certainly a good name for Georgia Tech. Dave Guyette has a night off. It's good to be with you, Dave. And maybe you got some information about the second half of the Syracuse game and why the quarters were 10 minutes in running time, no stoppage of the clock. Allen's early Heisman rankings, in his opinion, C.J. Stroud, don't disagree there. Caleb Williams, I would not put at number 2. I'd still have Bryce Young there. His injury, probably not that serious. May only miss a game. It depends on who you listen to. I would put Bryce Young and C.J. Stroud still 1 and 1A in my mind. Caleb Williams, playing well, almost cost them a game against Oregon State. Now, he did help them lead them to victory at the end, which certainly plays into his favor. But I'm not sold yet. Jalen Daniels from Alabama. I'm sorry, not Alabama, Kansas. Look at Jalen Daniels is going to have to go a ways probably to get into this conversation. And Blake Crom from Michigan. Maybe. This is big. I don't think this is going to be a running back. This is really not a running back trophy, at least now. And these things go in cycles. I don't think this is going to be a running back trophy this year. I think there's too many good quarterbacks out there. You missed a couple for sure. I mean, obviously the kid from Tennessee, whose name is escaping me at the moment, the quarterback. It'll probably come to me in a second. And I wouldn't leave Will Levis out of this conversation either. That kid is a really good quarterback, as you saw with Kentucky last week, playing behind a really, really bad offensive line. I would think he's still going to get consideration. We got a long, long ways to go. And it's hard for these guys out west to even get in the conversation because their games are not on prime time. All their games are, at night. Alan, we can give each other constructive criticism and still have a good time talking sports. We do that a lot. Not Lawrence, though. Lawrence likes to just, hear the sound of his own voice or his typewriter or whatever the hell he wants to talk about it. Good evening, Carlos. How are you tonight? Good to have you with us. Oh, thanks, Dave. I didn't go on that little tirade to get a pat on the back, but I appreciate that. I do this for fun, guys. And if guys don't have fun watching me, then don't watch. It's okay. Lawrence wasted time watching it to tell me that I suck. It made me laugh. Good evening, Rick Sherlock. Good to have you with us tonight. Kansas State playing very, very well. We'll be talking a little bit about them tonight. Martinez can get in line for the Heisman if he continues to play. I don't think Martinez is going to get in. I think this award, unless Young is out for an extended period, which it doesn't look like he's going to be, I would say that this is a race between Stroud and Young, and the rest are in a race to be able to get on stage in New York City as finalists. That's just my opinion as we sit here after 5 weeks. Hooker, thank you very much. I had it. It's funny. I was reading an article about the kid and Josh Heupel earlier today, and Josh Heupel and Tennessee's rise up the ladder here is after Hooker deciding to come back for his senior year was a big part of that. So thank you for that, both of you guys. Thank you. I love you guys can bail me out. That's why I can, if I forget something, I just say, please, one of my ombudsmen or assistant producers here, or producers, whatever you want to say, help bail me out. Neil Bush, I think the Heisman is a two-horse. Yeah, I think it's a two-horse race as well. Stroud's in the lead. And that game, he will probably lengthen or widen that lead, Neil, if Young is out for a bit. Young should have enough time to be able to close any gap, though. So I think it'll be a fun race to watch. Heupel was a Heisman candidate. Listen, Josh Heupel was a good quarterback. Led Oklahoma to their last national championship, if you remember, and had beat up on a very good Nebraska team. Nebraska was still relevant at the time. The team that he led to a national championship, I think, went 12-0. And during that run, they had beaten up on number 1 Nebraska, number 2 Wisconsin, and number 3 Kansas State. Or I may have the order mixed up a little bit. I know Nebraska was number 1 and had been coming off 3 national championships in 6 years, and had gotten beat. This Oklahoma team that Josh Heupel led to the national championship had gotten beat by Nebraska the year before, like 63-7 or something. So he was a good quarterback. He wasn't, he was not a Heisman. He may have been mentioned in that. I do not think he was a finalist that year or any year. Josh Heupel was a good quarterback, not a great quarterback. Carlos, oh my God, he's a better coach than he is a quarterback. Was a quarterback, I would say. Oh my God, and the great. Well, whatever. This is about college. Who cares about the NFL? I get into these conversations with I don't know if Carlos but Kenny Gifford and some other guys about when was the last time Ohio State produced a good NFL quarterback? And Ohio State's not in a job. Their job is not to produce NFL quarterbacks. It's to put winning football teams on the field in college. If they become NFL stars, well, great. That's not their job to produce NFL players. Carlos and I have this little debate every now and again, too. I mean, we sometimes mix up these two. As much as college football has changed, it's still not the minor leagues for college, for the NFL. It's not. And we'll get into a bunch more here. I knew Alan would know this, 12-0. That's certainly not looking that good right now, though, that's for sure, after getting a beatdown by TCU last week. What did TCU run off, about 680 yards against Oklahoma last week? It's funny, this hot seat meter site that I follow has Venable all of a sudden in the 4th spot. Now, I think that's overkill. He's obviously not in trouble. But, the bloom will come off that rose pretty quick if you're going to get beat like that at home. I believe that game was at home. And they beat Florida. I do remember that championship game, Oklahoma State. I'm sorry, Oklahoma. Jesus, sorry, Alan. I didn't mean to demean you that way. Oklahoma beat Florida State in that national championship game. And Neil's all over that as well. And that was that was a great championship game. That, I don't know, college football was still college football then. Who we got here? Boston X. Good to have you with us tonight, Boston X. I think you're a new viewer, or at least a new commenter. Good to have you with us. I think K-State and Kansas have their best chance. They may. TCU's got a really good team. I think TCU goes to Kansas and beats them this week, but I like Kansas State. I think this is going to be a race for the top, though. I think Oklahoma State is still the team I picked to win here, Boston. And I do like Kansas State. I like their coach. They might be in danger of losing their coach, Kansas and Kansas State, to theoretically better jobs this year. But I think they're both teams that are going to be relevant here. And I was a naysayer for Kansas for a while. They certainly proved me wrong here last week, or the last couple of weeks anyway. So interesting. Kansas, again, as I mentioned at the top of the show, getting ESPN Game Day to Lawrence, Kansas for the first time ever. And I love Game Day, guys. It's a ritual here in my house that it goes on at 9 o'clock and it's on until 12. I may not be sitting there watching every second of it, but it's got to be on the TVs all over the house as I'm farting around. Josh Heupel was a finalist. I'm going to ask Alan to fact check that a little bit, Carlos. So you could be right. My memory doesn't go back that far as who was finalists and who weren't. But I would be shocked if he was a finalist. But you could very well be right. And Alan will be my last word on that, as he is the Oklahoma aficionado here on my shows. If he came to New York City, then he was a finalist, and I am wrong. And, I am more than happy to say when I am. Sam Hartman could make a late run. Sam Hartman's playing at a very, very high level right now. Played great against Clemson. Played very well last week against Florida State, a much improved Florida State team. We'll probably get Larry Sorensen on to talk a little ACC football next week. I was going to do it this week, but I thought I'd wait one more week, as we'll see how Wake does this week as well. I'm just disappointed, and I think we talked about it last week. I think Wake Forest should have, at the end of the game, the end of regulation, they should have probably gone for the win when they had the ball, I want to say, at midfield. I think they were just across into Clemson territory, and Dave Clawson decided to kick the ball away and play for overtime. But I think their best chance to win was there. They weren't stopping Clemson at all. Correct. College is no minor league for the NFL. Agree. So we don't care then if Ohio State doesn't produce NFL quarterbacks when we're talking about great college quarterbacks, because it's only about whether they were good in college. Yes, TCU for real. Finally, listen, Sonny Dykes has gone back to his alma mater and done a great job there. They've got their own great offense. Obviously, as I said, 660, 670 yards of offense last week against Oklahoma. That's, you look at, when you're not playing some Division II team or something, that is a remarkable amount of yards you get against any team, let me tell you. The game was in Fort Worth. Okay, so I mixed that up. Anyway, you just want to shape it, though. That was a beatdown that really hurts Oklahoma. They're out of the rankings now. In fact, a Red River rivalry will get played, the Texas-Oklahoma game this week, with both teams unranked. One of the few years that's happened throughout history, for sure. You guys are riding me good with the comments. Good tonight. We'll get off to a good start tonight. Boston X official. Who's your team, by the way, Boston? I think there are 4 teams to win it. I have Kansas State. TCU we can't put out of this. Yeah, listen, I would say those 4 teams has as good a chance probably as anybody. The problem with this conference is the teams are so even that they're probably going to beat up on each other, and you could have a 2-loss team coming out of there, and it's going to kill their chances for the college football playoff. That's the problem that I see in the Big 12. Big 12 is a fun, the Big 12 is usually a fun conference, Neil. It's a conference that I've always enjoyed watching. It's been known for its offense more than its defense through the years. And for some fun shootouts, if you like that type of football. It's a very entertaining conference, and I enjoy it. And I like Oklahoma State a lot. I have always liked Mike Gundy as a coach. He gets beat up on this show by our SEC elitist at times. To me, he and my other favorite coach, Lane Kiffin, have a lot in common as far as bravado. But they're also have the similarities, and they're both very, very good football coaches. And sometimes that bravado overshadows that. And we see it sometimes in the comments we see here. Carlos, Lawrence, Kansas is going to be the best place to be Saturday morning. It probably will be. That place will be crazy. We're used to the attention going to Lawrence, Kansas during the basketball season, not football season. And Lance Leipold is doing a great job, and he may not be there very long, as he's going to be chased hard by both Nebraska and Wisconsin, if not more than that. And no matter how badly Nebraska's fallen, well, I've got some thoughts on that too that we'll have later. No matter how far they've fallen or how hard they've fallen, Nebraska is still a better job than Kansas. Problem is, Wisconsin might be a better job than Nebraska right now, too. Rick, did I miss Larry's birthday? Oh, my gosh. It's gotten so hard for me. I used to be very good on Facebook at keeping up with birthdays, and I just can't do it anymore. So, Larry, happy birthday, and a happy belated birthday anyway, and I'll get some wishes out to him after this. Neil took the ball out of Hartman's hands. Wake, I agree that 100%. The way their defense played or did not play in that Clemson game, there's no doubt in my mind Wake Forest should have been going for the win. Keep the ball in Hartman's hands, as Neil said, at the end of regulation, and gone for the win. What's the worst that's going to happen? You lost the game anyway. If you'd lost it on a field goal in regulation, so be it. Absolutely happy. One R, by the way, Carlos, just 1 R from Larry, not 2. We're not going to talk about anything but what you guys got up here tonight. That's awesome. First time since 1998, sorry, that Oklahoma, Texas featured both teams unranked. Yes, long time between that type of game, and only a couple times in the history of the rivalry has it happened for sure. There's the first boo for Mr. Kiffin. We knew where that would come from. Big 12 they are playing some defense. Now, Oklahoma State, listen, the last couple of years, Oklahoma State was known for their wild and crazy games. In the last couple of years, their defense was very, very good, while their offense fell backwards. This year, the offense has stepped back up while the defense has struggled a bit, especially in their opener. But it's starting to come along and catch up with the offense, and they're getting some really good play out of the offense this year that they weren't getting the last couple of years. That's why I like them. They're a much more better balanced team this year. And listen, I like Mike Gundy. Must be at least the partial mullet he's still got. Third straight, maybe when we get to 40 or 100 straight, maybe I guess that's a big deal in Kansas, right? What a class, 2002 Heisman. I don't remember. You'd have to refresh me because, again, I can't go back that far before. Skipped Heisman comment. Okay. Anyway, let's get it. We'll have Mark Mancini coming in about 8:10 today, and we'll get on him about Pittsburgh losing last week to who did they lose to? Hold on. Let me get my notes up here. Who are the winners and losers last week? Big winners last week. TCU, huge winner last week, coming out of that game, not just beating Oklahoma, but beating up on Oklahoma. UCLA, 5-0 now, with a big win at home against Washington, who guys like me were talking up big time as being back. They beat up on them pretty good. It wasn't even as close as a score in my mind. Kansas State continuing to play good football with another victory last week in that Big 12. Bama, I think, with a nice win over Arkansas. They did pull away at the end. That game might have been a little closer than what the final score was, but I count Bama as one of the winners last week. Not just the games, but I'm saying when I say winner, I mean going forward, this is certainly a good sign for them as being able to win a conference or get to a playoff. Mississippi State beating Texas A&M. Wake Forest with a nice comeback victory against an improved Florida State team. I can't read my writing. Ole Miss. My other favorite coach, as I said, Lane Kiffin gets a nice win over Kentucky. That was a good football game. Kentucky should have won this game. Their offensive line is just horrendous. This was a difference in this game. Will Levis he's asked to do too much on this team. They ran the football pretty well, I thought. But Ole Miss, their defense, that's the best defense I've seen Lane Kiffin team have, at least at Ole Miss. And maybe certainly from before Florida Atlantic as well. And they also run the football very, very well. Some on the losing side of this, we'll talk. You guys can put your comments up, and I'll come back to whatever you're talking about as well. Some other losers last week. Washington loses a great momentum they had built. Georgia, to me, sorry, Rick. Georgia's a big loser last week, even though they won their game. They barely got out of that game with Missouri, a bottom feeder in the SEC with a victory. So to me, they should be. I would put Alabama back number one, because if I'm going to penalize Alabama, for playing a bad game earlier in the year against Texas, I certainly got to penalize Georgia for almost losing to a worse team than Texas. I still think they're gonna stumble. Oklahoma, obviously a big loser. Minnesota comes away a loser. Pittsburgh. With a loss, I'm going to see who Pittsburgh lost to so we can remember when. Where are they? Oh, Georgia Tech, right. Georgia Tech, after firing Jeff Collins, gets a win over Pittsburgh. Bad football team, guys. Conference winner. Pac-12, I think, was a winner last week with USC winning big again. UCLA looking really good against Washington. Utah getting their mojo back a little bit. The top of the Pac-12 looks better than I would have given it credit for. Probably still have to be undefeated in that conference to have a shot at the playoff, but you may see a USC team do that. I don't think UCLA is that good, but we'll see. The group of 5 teams, they come out a loser so far because there's nobody that's going to have any chance. With Houston being as bad as they've been, they were the much ballyhooed team in the group of 5 conferences. They come out a loser here after 5 weeks for sure. And also, I don't know, let me get your comments and then we'll see what else I can come up with here. Gundy is a man, yes. Well, those comments are, about 12 years old, so they're a little dated, but he's also a really good football coach. Anybody who doesn't think he's a good football coach, just like I say Lane Kiffin is a good football coach, just check the records, guys. Heupel was runner-up in 2000. Good. Wow. Man, I missed that. Good one. And I'll tell you what, he's a better coach than he was a quarterback. Georgia isn't as good as last year, but it's still well, I've said all along they couldn't be as good as last year. How could they possibly be after having 14 or 15 guys get drafted into the NFL last draft? They are still a force. And I didn't, when I said they would take a step back, Clemson took a step back last year, was still a force. I mean, 10-2 is not a bad year. Unless you're Georgia or Alabama or Clemson, apparently. I think Georgia will lose somewhere here in the SEC, maybe to Kentucky in a couple weeks. Although that offensive line of Kentucky's is just atrocious. Very bad loss for Washington. Not just the fact that they lost the game, but the way they lost it. They were never in this game. Never. Michael Penix Jr. did not look good. He had put himself in the Heisman conversation up until that stinker last week, and I don't think he'll be able to wash that off him and get back in that conversation. Drew Brees finished 3rd. LaDainian Tomlinson finished 4th. Who finished 2nd? Oh, 2nd was who finished 1st? 2000. Isn't that terrible? Oh, who did finish 1st? Arkansas not ready for the big show. I agree. Their defense really fell apart in the second half, especially the fourth quarter. When theoretically they had a chance to maybe pull an upset. They kept the game fairly close. And then when Young goes down, you think, okay, maybe they got a shot. But they just, I don't know, they run the ball for about 200 yards in the fourth quarter. This was a prove-it game, and they fell apart. I don't disagree. I don't disagree with any of that. Kentucky's not deep enough. Well, I can tell you this. Kentucky's only problem in my mind is their offensive line. Kentucky and their special teams. By the way, that's the other big loser, not just this week, but in this season. So I talk a lot, and Carlos, and Alan, and some other people have brought it up to me, that how much I talk about special teams and how bad it is. It's bad in the NFL. It's also bad in college. I mean, how many teams beat themselves with horrendous special teams play last week? Kentucky was one, missing an extra point, bobbling a snap, so they missed another one. I don't know what happened on a third one because I stepped away from the TV. They scored to make it 20-19, and I came back. I swear to God, nothing could have happened. It was 22-19. So they must have gone for 2. I don't know why they would have gone for 2, but something happened on that conversion, and it was run back for 2 points by Ole Miss. And I think I brought this up Sunday, and I do think somebody made a comment about it. So it was probably some bungled play there. In the Kansas game as well, special teams came into play in that game. I'm trying to remember now. The final score, I think, was 14-11. They beat Iowa State, and I know Iowa State missed like 3 field goals and an extra point. I mean, it's just this is atrocious. The stinkability, for lack of a better word, of special teams play across NCAA football is gone. Now, again, that doesn't mean every single team, but as a rule, every week you're seeing horrendous play in 4 or 5 games that are costing teams victories. Well, we're talking about 2002, though, Alan. So I thought you were talking about 2000. I don't. Maybe that's the right year, 2000. Okay, that could be Carson Palmer's year. God, I'm getting old. That's 20 years ago. Carson Palmer won a Heisman Trophy. So it's up to Tennessee to prove they can win in bigger games. You're right. They got them coming up because they've got to face, if I'm not mistaken, they've still got, in very short order, Tennessee's got Alabama, Georgia, and Kentucky coming up very shortly, if I'm not mistaken, Carlos. So you're going to find out a lot about this Tennessee team, and I think they're for real. They might be the team that beats Georgia. They might be the team that beats Alabama. Oregon is making a run with Bo Nix. They're not going anywhere with Bo Nix, Oregon, I don't think. Well, maybe if they don't play SEC teams anymore, maybe they'll be okay. Picking Tennessee in a lock over LSU. And Washington State. Washington State's played decent football this year. I think they lost a close game this past week, if I'm not mistaken. Who'd they play here? Let's bring up the trusty scoreboard, shall we? Boy, there's a lot of leagues, right? Of course, the Pac-12 doesn't come up where it's supposed to. How come this isn't alphabetical? Well, Washington State, they beat Cal last week. That's right, 28-9. So they're 4-1 right now, 1-1 in the Pac-12. So that could be a good upset pick, Alan. And I do like Tennessee over LSU this week. LSU's playing better than I thought they would at 4-1. Certainly makes that Florida State win look better, as I said last week in week 1. But I think Tennessee will get the job done this week. We'll talk more about that. Chris Winkie. Good grief. Well, and wasn't he like 27 years old when he won the Heisman? And then Heupel beat him in the championship game, right? But I'm pretty sure he was like 26, 27 years old when he won the Heisman. I could be exaggerating, I suppose, but he was not a young guy. He wasn't your normal 21-year-old Heisman Trophy winner. Half the games are lost on special teams. Agreed. 3 missed field goals and a muff punt for Iowa State last week. Thank you, Alan. Washington State lost to Oregon. Is that what you're telling me? Not last week, but probably the week before. So anyway, so that's some good football. But we also saw a lot of other stuff happen this week. Well, we've already had so far. Nebraska fires Scott Frost. We've had, I guess, let me get into this a little bit. Yeah, bear with me 1 second, guys. I don't know. We'll go here to college. We've already had Nebraska fire Scott Frost. We had Georgia Tech fire Jeff Collins. We've had Arizona State fire Herm Edwards. We've had now Colorado fire Carl Doral, who I said last week would get fired. Probably, I said it would probably be the 4th week in a row with a firing, but he gets fired. But most surprisingly at all to me was Paul Chryst getting fired at Wisconsin. This is going to be the best job that opens up, at least so far. And I would think that And this is a coach with a 720 winning percentage, who won three Big Ten West titles. Didn't win a championship, didn't sniff a playoff, but this is a pretty consistent winner. 9 wins last year. And now the program, there's some rumblings inside the program that there's problems behind the scenes. Their recruiting has slipped. I think their recruiting class had been consistently in the low teens and slipped to like 41st or something last year. But Paul Chris has been a proven winner. This is shocking to see them and pay $11 million. A program like Wisconsin pay $11 million for him just to go away. And I'm also shocked he took the $11 million because he had about $20 million coming, but he wanted a lump sum, so he took the 11. I'm not really sure I understand that, giving up, $9 million just to get your money up front. But that's a pretty sizable investment to fire a guy in midseason. Now, I know they think Leonard is maybe the heir apparent. He's only been named the interim. He's not the head coach. So they probably will shop to maybe get a guy like Leopold or somebody like that. Or Leipold. I keep saying Leopold now and again. Sorry, it's what I do. Well, they're going to probably be tempted to go chase a guy like Leipold, who has ties to the Wisconsin program, also has ties to the Nebraska program. That's going to be very interesting to see what happens there. Neil mentioned earlier the Georgia Tech opening. I would consider, again, I think Munkin is definitely a consideration there. I want to get into where some of the other candidates might be for some of these schools. As we were talking about, let's stick with Georgia Tech for a second because Neil brought it up earlier. Jamie Chadwell's definitely going to be a contender there. There's probably some other places at the Coastal Carolina coach. You'll see his name pop up in a majority of the openings. Probably not out west or the Midwest. This guy probably needs to be in the Southeast, the Atlantic coast, somewhere like that. Josh Gaddis, who's the first-year offensive coordinator for Miami, former offensive coordinator for Michigan. Bill O'Brien's name is going to pop up for this Georgia game and this Georgia Tech opening. And don't forget about Deion Sanders, right? Bill O'Brien's name is going to come up a lot, I think, for jobs this year. I think this is probably going to be the cycle Bill O'Brien goes back to. I don't think he's going back to the pros. I think Bill O'Brien will stay in college. Did a really good job at Penn State, keeping that when that team was, at its depths after the whole Paterno and Sandusky nonsense, tragedies, whatever you want to call them. He did a really good job there before he left to go back to the NFL. I think he'll get a college gig this year. Nebraska, Leipold's going to be on that list. Matt Campbell, he'll come up for this Wisconsin and Nebraska job as well. Urban Meyer, forget about Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer's going to get mentioned for all these jobs, right? He'll be attached to all these schools, but none of these schools are going to attach themselves to him. Urban Meyer's career as a coach is over. End of story. If an intriguing name to think about in Nebraska to me is Gary Patterson, former TCU coach. I just think his approach and his coaching style and the way he likes to play the game of football, his teams to play the game of football, would fit Nebraska very well. Listen, Nebraska's never ever recovered from a horrible. Firing Frank Solich, very similar to what happened to Paul Chryst here in Wisconsin. Nebraska thought they should still be contending for national championships. They weren't happy with 9-3, 9-4 seasons. Frank Solich gets fired. They have an awful coaching search and end up with they chased a bunch of NFL coaches after they got turned down by Houston Nutt. Like that would have made a big deal if Houston Nutt had become the head coach, right? But then they start chasing NFL coaches, finally end up with Bill Callahan, who brings an NFL-style offense to a team that had run the wishbone for 40 years, and they've never recovered. Never. They had some decent seasons under Bo Pelini, but they have never recovered from that horrendous stretch there at all. I'll get to your comments here in a second. So that job's open. The Wisconsin job's open. Listen, Leonard's going to have he's a defensive coordinator there and has been, but he's been there. His only coaching experience is with Paul Chryst. He's going to be the leading candidate there, but what happens the remainder of this year could go a long ways to see how far they chase guys like Leipold and Aranda from Baylor. Bill O'Brien's name will come up in Wisconsin, I think, as well. Who else? Colorado. Listen, I think a name to think about in Colorado is going to be maybe Brian Harsin, who's going to get fired. It's just a matter of when at Auburn. He's not going to survive. If he survives the season, he's not going to survive to another season. I think I would keep my eye on him and possibly Bronco Mendenhall. Bronco Mendenhall will probably be in play for the Arizona State job, the Colorado job, and others that open up in that general area. Don't forget Dan Mullen in these conversations as well, who most recently was at Florida in some of these conversations as well. Specifically Colorado and Arizona State, I would say. Neil brought up Todd Monken, the Georgia offensive coordinator. He's going to get mentioned in a lot of these jobs. The thing that might hurt Monken this year, because we kind of switch back and forth, right, between retreads of head coaches to the hot coordinators. And the hot coordinators this year haven't necessarily done that well. Venables had his struggles out in Oklahoma, for instance. So that, the trend might be to go back to the retread of head coaches this cycle rather than hot coordinators. So we'll see. That could go against Monken. We'll see. Great coach, though, and probably a good pick for Georgia Tech and a great fit, but we'll see what happens there. Nobody gave me any answers on that Syracuse question I had either. Good Lord, Georgia, if they lay an egg against Auburn, they're going to drop big time. Well, look, they'd have to lose to drop big time. And they're not going to lose to Oregon or Auburn. Auburn's awful. And as much, again, as I don't think Georgia's nearly the team they were last year or nearly what they looked like in beating a really unprepared Oregon team in week one. They're certainly not a bad football team. They're not going to lose to a really bad Auburn team. Is going for Mullen a good idea? Look, Dan Mullen's a good football coach. He might have been in over his head at Florida. He had some recruiting issues at Florida, but Dan Mullen did a really good job at Mississippi State in keeping what is a program afloat, a place where it's very hard to win. And Mike Leach is doing the same kind of thing now. But Dan Mullen had some really, really good teams in Mississippi State. Don't forget. But again, they were kind of overlooked because the SEC is so good, that they couldn't compete with the Alabamas and the Georgias. Jeff Levy's name will come up. But as I said, Alan, I got a feeling because of the struggles of some of these hot coordinators like Venable this year, ADs will start to kind of go the other way. And this is what always happens, right? These things are cylindrical. Close enough. 1 year, one cycle, we're going after retread coaches like Dan Mullen and Bronco Mendenhall. By the way, Bronco Mendenhall stepped away from Virginia of his own volition. He was not fired. He'll be in great demand this year, probably out in that part of the country that we talked about. So Levy's name will definitely come up. We're going to see whether there's going to be a bias against some of the coordinators this year. And they go towards the retreads because of some of the struggles this year. I think he can be in a staff, but be a head coach that is overwhelming for him at Florida. I think he can be in a staff, but to be head coach that it wasn't overwhelming. It was overwhelming for him in Florida. He was a really good head coach at Mississippi State. To say Dan Mullen can't be a head coach, I think is probably inaccurate. Can he coach at one of the top football schools, or what's expected to be one of the top football schools in the country and in the SEC at a minimum? He had his struggles there. He had trouble recruiting. A lot of the Florida schools have had trouble recruiting recently, though. Let's not forget. Because, number one, some of those, they were losing kids to UCF and schools like that they weren't losing them to before. They've been losing them to the Georgias and the Alabamas, and that, not being able to keep those kids at home like they'd have in the past. Florida State ran into the same problems, right? Miami's run into the same problems. Unable to keep the really good recruits home in Florida has cost both those schools. And it hurt Dan Mullen in Florida. And I do think he can be a good head coach at the right school. And you know what? Colorado is going to be a very tough situation for anybody to go into, by the way. Pickles, good evening, good Pickles. One of Robert Butler's number one followers. We're happy to, anytime Pickles joins us. Good to have you with us tonight. Georgia's too deep at every position. Well, last year they were 3 deep at every position, and so they were a much better football team. They're not as good as they were last year. They're still a very, very good football team, though. They're certainly in the top 6 teams in this country, but I do think that they will stumble in the SEC. I think Alabama could still stumble in the SEC. So I think you could see 2 one-loss teams, or a 1-loss and a 2-loss team playing in the SEC championship game this year. Urban Meyer's not coming back. I guarantee. Here's the thing: nobody's touching Urban Meyer with a 10-foot pole. As desperate as Nebraska is, do you think Nebraska, after what they've been through with the Scott Frost, and as I said, for 2 decades now, not 2 decades, but almost 2 decades, certainly since they went to the Big Ten, Nebraska's been irrelevant. Do you think they want to go through some fiasco with Urban Meyer? They're not going to do it. Don't forget, Urban Meyer just didn't flame out in Jacksonville. He got chased out of Ohio State because of the allegations that went on against his assistant coach, that he ignored what was going on, and that's what left call. Don't forget, that's why he left Ohio State. Basically chased out of town by the mob. Mickey Delaney, our favorite Great Northwest follower. Great to have you with us, Mickey. Sorry your Huskies didn't do better this week, but last week, I should say. But the Huskies and the Cougars are both doing very, very well this season, certainly better than possibly most of us expected. Pickles, exactly. Georgia, Alabama, Clemson are all raking Florida. And sort of Texas schools, by the way. And it used to be, those Florida schools were so good because they would keep those kids home. The Pickles. I got to give you a high again. You get 2 highs out of me now, Pickles. Mickey's back. Good to see Mickey back. Urban Meyer's as dead as Queen. Might be too early. It might be too early for that, Pickles, but I agree with you. Urban Meyer will never smell, certainly not a big time college coaching job, and his ego's too big to go somewhere else. So I think Urban Meyer is done. I think Urban Meyer will just have to be happy on the Fox pregame show, and that'll be that. Yeah, it doesn't matter whether he cares. The schools have to be willing to hire him, and they're not going to. And to what Pickles said, He's as dead as the queen. Might be too soon, Pickles. Oh, finally, Alan gets me some information here. Wagner wanted to cut the game short because they were already down 49-0 at halftime, and there were some injuries piling up. Both teams agreed. Man. I figured it exactly. It was this. I mean, I didn't know for sure, so I didn't want to say it without, facts. So thank you, Alan, for checking that out for me. Exactly what I probably assumed. And look at Wagner, don't schedule Syracuse and go there for a payday. And then when you're down by 50 at halftime, can we shorten the game so we don't, how is it okay just to change the rules of football in the middle of a football game? Texas is shaking that money tree. Well, that we know, Pickles, for sure. There's a shout out to Carlos. Get a shovel. Get a shovel. You're a good man, Pickles. You're a good man. Carlos, who's being a pesky guest? Oh, my God. Anyway, let's take a look. We got to take one of the big games this. Well, let me take a look at the rankings first, and I'm going to go to some games. So who are the big winners and losers in the polls this week? Alabama jumps back to number 1. Georgia falls back to number 2, which, again, as I said, if you're going to punish Alabama for nearly losing to Texas, you certainly got to punish Alabama for almost losing to Missouri, who's even worse. No changes in the 5 spots below them here, and I go by the AP poll, at least until the playoff poll comes out. Oklahoma State moved up 2. Big mover, Ole Miss moves up to 5 spots to number 9. Doing a great job, Lane Kiffin. Defense and a running game. Something new for Lane Kiffin's teams. Penn State, Utah, Oregon, and all move up 1 spot. Kentucky with a big drop to number 13, 6 spots down. They could move back up, though, as they've got still a tough, if they win their games, they've got a tough road to hoe in the SEC, as everybody does there. NC State only drops 4. I thought they might have dropped more to 14. They did not play a good football game against Clemson last week, by the way, guys. This is a game that was a 10-point game, was not nearly as close as a score. Clemson scored a garbage time touchdown to cut it to 10. It wasn't even as close as 17. North Carolina State put up no offense, and they were certainly way overmatched. Wake Forest with a big jump up 7 after a win over, as I said, a improved Florida State team. BYU trying to fight their way back after a bad loss to Oregon a few weeks back, move up 3. TCU, UCLA, Kansas at 17, 18, and 19. Jump into the poll from being unranked last week. Kansas State up 5. Washington falls 6. Syracuse, Mississippi, Cincinnati, and LSU all move in after being in the rankings last week. So big move into the rankings by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 7 teams move in after not being ranked last week, which means 7 teams fall out. Baylor, Texas A&M, and Jimbo Fisher. What a freaking atrocity that program is. This guy is, I say it every week, one of the highest paid coaches in the country, top recruiting class every single year, can't win games. Wins games, can't win big games. Oklahoma, Arkansas, Minnesota, Florida State, and Pittsburgh all fall out of the top 25. So interesting stuff there. Let's go through, and I'll give my locks, and let me get your comments here. First, I'm going to go through some of the games for this week, give a few predictions, and I'll do my locks, and don't be surprised if, along with Mark Mancini in a little bit. Let me get your comments here before I do that, because I know we've got some I missed. Your base. What is that? What is that? Oh, Texas. I get it. That was Allen. He's after Allen there. Everyone used to schedule MTSU for a walk. Yeah. Yeah. Good point. Those days are over for a lot of schools. Penn State can mess up Ohio and Michigan's hope. They can. But again, I'm not a big James Franklin fan. He never beats Ohio State and Michigan. Not when the chips are down, not in important games. And again, I said never. I'm not going to, I don't mean that literally. I'm sure he's won games against both of them, but not when they're good. Lane Coachin's coaching for his dinner. What are you talking about? Link. I'm not getting into that stuff. PCU wants to play against Ohio. It's Ohio State, by the way. They don't play against Ohio. When do they play against them? The next few weeks. Yeah. But they don't play. When they're any good, they don't beat those teams, Carlos. That's my problem with James Franklin. He beats those teams when they're down, not when they're good. And they're both very good. If the Aggies beat Alabama, Allen, I cannot see any chance that Alabama gets beat by Texas A&M. Kent State even put up 22 on Georgia. Good point. They struggled a bit there too. That's two not good football teams they struggle with. I'm not a big fan, Pickles, of Penn State. I understand they've got, they got a good football team. They've had good football teams that have not beaten other good football teams in their conference in big games. They'll beat those teams when they're down, but they won't beat them when they're good. That's been my problem with James Franklin all along. They don't win the big games. So we'll see. And I'll eat my words if I have to. I've done it a couple times this year. I've had to do it with Kansas. But I still will pick against Kansas this week. Let's get into some of these games from this week, guys. And you guys can put up your comments. And I'm going to go through some of these games. We'll get through as many as I can before. And I'll go through them fairly quickly so we can get through them. We'll start with Cincinnati at South Florida. This should be an easy Cincinnati win. Cincinnati's playing really good football. They've lost one game this year in their opener. Gosh, now I can't remember who they played. They played an SEC team, didn't they? Why am I not remembering? Doesn't matter. They're 4-1. They're playing really good football. Mississippi State coming off a big win against Texas A&M at Arkansas. Very interesting game in the Southeast Conference. I think Arkansas is going to be feeling the remnants of that game against Alabama. I see Mississippi State winning this game by 10 or 11 points. Syracuse is off this week. Washington will play at Arizona State. This should be an easy win for Washington to bounce back from that loss to UCLA last week. Kansas State will go to Iowa State. Another nice matchup. Every week, there's 3 or 4 really good games in the Pac-12. As Neil Bush said earlier, Pac-12, a really, really, really good conference with a lot of consistency or parity, I should say. Kansas State, I think, will win this game in Iowa State. And Matt Campbell, is the bloom coming off the rose a little bit for Matt Campbell? He had a great year during the COVID season, and his teams last year I think he was only 7-5 last year. They're kind of up and down this year. This is kind of a big game, I think, for Iowa State. And I think Kansas State's going to continue their hot streak. Only a loss this year to Tulane, kind of looking ahead to Oklahoma. Let's see. TCU at Kansas. 2 ranked teams. When was the last time TCU played Kansas and they were both ranked? Never. Prediction. It's going to be a high-scoring affair. I think a lot of predictions I see call for Kansas winning this game by 3 points, 38-35, blah, blah, blah. I'm going to call it 41-36 TCU. That won't be my lock. BYU at Notre Dame. 42. I think Notre Dame is going to get this game. This game's in Las Vegas. And I do think that Notre Dame will continue their better play and beat BYU in this game, probably by 10 or so. Wake Forest at Army. I think Wake Forest wins this game easily. Army's not playing really good football right now. Not one of Jeff Monken's better teams. But they'll be tough for a while, and I think Wake Forest in the end will pull away. North Carolina State at Florida State, another matchup of teams that lost last week, highly ranked, highly anticipated games. I think Florida State will bounce back and beat NC State. I think NC State has a bit of a hangover from their chance to beat a top 10 team for the first time in their program's history. And I think there'll be a little bit of a hangover there. Kentucky goes to South Carolina. I do think, even though South Carolina is 4-2 and they've lost to Arkansas and Georgia so far, Spencer Rattler, he's been turning the ball over, and I thought he might have a rebirth here in South Carolina, but I don't think it's going to happen. I think Kentucky will handle them pretty easily this weekend. Oregon at Arizona. Oregon will roll. Arizona's terrible. Their coach will be one of the next to be fired probably as well. Number 11 Utah at UCLA, one of the big games this week. This is going to be a big game going towards deciding the Pac-12. I think Utah will win this game on the road. A lot of the experts picking UCLA to continue their hot streak. I need to see them win one more big game before I'm really believing in Chip Kelly's team. I'm going to pick Utah to win this game 35-28, and many are going the other way. I know that. We'll get the Penn State is idle this week. Big games coming up, as Carlos alluded to, against Michigan and Ohio State coming up. Ole Miss will play Vanderbilt. This game will not even be close. Tennessee and LSU. This is a very interesting game. LSU's played much better than I would have expected them to in Brian Kelly's first year, but I think Tennessee will win this game by a touchdown, maybe 10 points. Oklahoma State at Texas Tech, another interesting game, as Texas Tech has played tough this year with their new head coach. This Big 12, again, very, very, very good. But Spencer Saunders, who was a big problem with turnover. Speaking of turnover machines, he was one the last couple of years for Oklahoma State. He's now cleaned that part of his game up, and they're scoring 47 points a game, and now their defense is starting to catch up a little bit. So I think this game will be a 10-point Oklahoma State victory. USC against Washington State. I think USC wins this handily. Allen did pick them to lose. And Clemson at Boston College. This should be an easy Clemson victory. Michigan at Indiana, same thing. Ohio State at Michigan State. Ohio State will roll Michigan State. Michigan State's got to be wondering why they gave Mel Tucker this big contract, maybe a little too prematurely. Oregon at Auburn. Georgia at Auburn. This should be an easy Georgia win, and if it's not, we'll know Georgia's not for real, by the way. And Alabama at Texas A&M, which should have been a big game, has lost some of its luster because Jimbo Fisher's team cannot get out of its own way. Let's see. We got a couple comments here to follow up on. We got that. We said beware Penn State. Bearcats lost to Florida. Yes, thank you. They lost to Florida in their opening game. Give Tulane credit as well. 4-1 this year. Tulane's playing well. I said the group of 5 schools were down. And I shouldn't say when I say they're down in the sense that they really don't have anybody that's really going to compete, obviously, for a college playoff. But it'll be an interesting race, I think, to see who gets that New Year's Day 6 spot from that group of 5 schools. You'll have Coastal Carolina in play there. You'll have Texas San Antonio in play there. You'll have you'll have Tulane in play, and whoever wins the AAC will be in play. You'll have somebody good from the Mountain West potentially. But right now, Coastal Carolina, I think, would be in the driver's seat there. You might have had James Madison in play if they're actually eligible for a bowl game. And, with Syracuse and and Wagner changing the rules of a football game, maybe they'll consider changing the rules for James Madison so they'll be bowl eligible. Don't see that happening, but I think it's a silly rule anyway. TCU 7-point favorite on the road. TCU is really good, Alan. Might be my lock. I don't know. We'll see. And take those points at home. I mean, you like them to win the game. You like them to cover the spread. Two different things. Even though both teams aren't ranked, Red River should still be a fun game. It will be a fun game. I think I will take Oklahoma in this game against Texas. I think Steve Scarsazian may not survive to have Arch Manning as his quarterback. We'll see about that. If they need to finish with a flurry, I think, this year for Steve Scarsazian to keep his job. I'd be a little concerned if I were him. What else is going on around the world of college football before we have Mark Mancini join us? I had a couple of things to chat about. We talked about that. It's interesting that Lance Leipold is talking about how he has no plans to leave for Open Badger's job despite his Wisconsin ties. He's happy here. What coach has ever said he was looking around? If Lance Leipold gets offered a Wisconsin job or the Nebraska job, he's gone in a New York minute. He is not sticking around Lawrence, Kansas. Because, again, you can win there, but you can't win consistently. He's done a great job. And maybe he's built something that another coach can continue to win some games. But Lance Leipold is not staying in Lawrence, Kansas if he gets offered one of the a better Power 5 job. And Nebraska's a better job than Kansas. I don't care how bad they are this year. Wisconsin's a really good job. Nobody says they're leaving. Well, again, so he didn't lie, right? Everybody lies. I don't know why people get so upset. I remember when the Miami Dolphins got so upset because Nick Saban said at a press conference, I'm not going to Alabama. I'm not considering taking the Alabama job. And then he took the Alabama job. What's he going to sit there and say when he's still the coach of that team? Oh, yeah, we're talking to Alabama and we'll see how it works out. Nobody does that. And then everybody gets all upset. But what a coach is supposed to do? You can't sit there and say, yep, I'm talking to Nebraska, I'm talking to Wisconsin, I'm talking to this team, and then go out and play a game that day. Nobody does that. Nobody's ever going to do that. So I don't know why people get upset about it when it happens. Listen, as we talk about this topic, look who we got here, except Mark Mancini from Mancini Media comes in.
I've just pissed off New York because I said after this weekend, the Statue of Liberty is going to fall on Citi Field and the Mets are going to be done. So that's a topic we can discuss on Sunday.
Oh, absolutely.
But I think I pissed off the whole state of New York.
Well, by Sunday, and again, we don't want to get too deep because we want to make sure we get our time in for college, but by Sunday, we'll have a pretty good idea where they stand.
Yeah, then we're going after the Dodgers. We're going to take out two of the biggest markets in the league. Start with the Mets and then go to the Dodgers.
Yeah, well, we'll get to that on Sunday for sure. And Carlos and I will probably be having some conversations on the Are You Serious show Friday morning about the wild card.
Hey, come on, Tom Brady. We can talk about Tom Brady on Sunday. I don't want to see him get a divorce. That's a power couple, man. Come on, man.
Tom Brady. Listen, let me ask you this. How does your team lose to Georgia Tech, who just fired their head coach, Jeff Collins, last week, and your team, which I think you might have been your best bet, I don't remember, but how do they lose to Georgia Tech, one of the worst teams in the country?
Well, Narducci didn't have us ready to play football. I mean, I don't know. I don't know how do you explain it. We were competitive in the first 3 weeks. When you looked at it, I don't know what happened. We're in our backyard. This team's coming in 1-3. And all I can say is it was the Malik Carter show there, I guess.
Yeah.
Malachi Carter.
I think Pittsburgh is just a bit overrated and was. I don't think they're a top 25 team. They're not, of course, they're not now, but I don't think they will be when the season ends either.
Look at all the top schools that were out of the top 25. Syracuse wasn't in there. UCLA wasn't in there. And then they finally, started.
7 teams in the AP poll that were not in last week for sure. Kansas finally gets in. How about that game? How about this? How about give me your thoughts on this? Kansas, because I've been talking a little bit about Lance Leipold, but Kansas, and so ESPN Game Days for the first time ever will be on the campus of Lawrence, Kansas, at the University of Kansas for the TCU Kansas game. I think Kansas will get beat.
You know what? I might have to break out that Kansas thing I got at the Goodwill for $5. If I bought it at the student store, it probably would have cost me $50. I might have to break that thing out.
5-0, ranked for the first time in God knows how long, maybe since Mark Mancini was there back in 2005, eating himself out of a job. That's just a low blow. I shouldn't have said that. But Lance Leipold is listen, this guy's going to be in Kansas for exactly about 3 more months because he's going to be going either to Wisconsin or Nebraska in my mind.
Yeah, that was sad. Wisconsin and letting the guy go. I don't understand that. Everybody's trying to keep up with Barry Alvarez.
Paul Chris has had a good run there. He's not a bad football coach. To fire him and pay him $11 million to go away in the middle of the season.
How much rope? I get on the Florida shows too. How much rope is Cristobal going to get down there in Miami, man?
He'll get enough. I mean, it's funny. I mean, look at even I fell for it, and I thought this team finally was going to get over the hump. They finally had a real quarterback. Now the quarterback's got to fight for his job. There was debate whether he was even going to get a start this week, Van Dyke.
Yeah. I'm ready for the big one Saturday. Jimbo Fisher's going to get his ass kicked, man. This is going to be the most watched game, man. Alabama's going to take out Texas A&M big time.
You know, this was going to be a much ballyhooed game early before the season with the back and forth between Saban and Jimbo, and I think Saban can he's probably happy with some of the rat poison that's been being passed around because Jimbo might leave town. Listen, Jimbo Fisher's the seat's got to be getting kind of hot under him.
Yeah,
this guy making huge bucks. Wasn't long ago he signed the biggest contract in the SEC, an extension. Now it's obsolete, obviously, because that's what happens. But he has the best recruiting, or one of the best recruiting classes in the country year after year, but doesn't even sniff an SEC championship game, much less a college playoff.
How many new sheriffs come into town and they're going to restore order across the SEC battlefields and knock out Alabama? And you come to find out the Jimbo Fishers, the Brian Kellys, the Steve Sarkisians. Come on, man. There's only one Nick Saban.
Nick Saban, I say this all the time here, and I know Rick Sherlock gets mad at me, but Nick Saban is the greatest college football coach of all time. Yeah. He's better than Bear Bryant. He's better.
Well, look at Bryce Young goes down. Another guy steps in. You got the Gibbs running attack, 2 70-yard runs. I mean, They don't miss a beat. It's unbelievable.
But the argument I always get is, well, it's Alabama and anybody can win Alabama, but nobody wanted Alabama between Bear Bryant and Nick Saban. Well, I shouldn't say that. Gene Stallings won a national championship, but he took over a horrendous program when he came there. How many years?
That'd be almost like saying somebody can do a show comparable to you. Nobody can touch you, Keith. Come on, man. This TGI Sports Talk is sweeping the country, brother.
See, there's the anti. There you go, guys. There's the anti. What's this guy's name? Lawrence Bodston, who really wanted to rip me on one of my Patriot recaps this week. He not
Lawrence. What? What's his name? Lawrence Bond. He's used every alphabet of the letters to compensate his last name.
I told him he's got too many consonants in his name. No, you need a couple of vowels. So anyway, we had a little back and forth. I usually don't get into it with people, but this guy was just being a jerk. So
where's Pat Sajak when you need him to flip the numbers?
Right. Vanna flips the letters. So listen, Yes, he's talking about the SEC. I mean, if there's a year where Alabama and Georgia are vulnerable, this seems to be it because the league's it's deeper in good teams. Ole Miss really impressed me against another impressive team in my mind in Kentucky. Ole Miss played good defense. They run the ball like I've never seen a Lane Kiffin team run the ball. Is this a year that an Ole Miss or Tennessee can break through and get to the SEC championship game and maybe have a chance to win that conference?
I mean, I don't want to say we're grasping, but I know when Steve Spurrier went down to South Carolina with the Gamecocks, he was the next thing that was going to break these whole barriers and win a championship. I don't know. I mean, Penn State's putting a nice little thing together. What they're doing, I like what they're doing. They're in upset mode too.
Yeah. We talked about it earlier too. I think they've got a bye this week, and they've got Michigan and Ohio State, maybe back to back. My problem with James Franklin, when Ohio State and Michigan are good, he never beats them. He beats them when they're down a little bit, but when they're good, he never beats them, even when he's got a really good team. And that's what I see happening this year. I think both those teams will beat Penn State.
Yeah, and the knock on USC, they don't play anybody, but let me tell you something. 40 points in all those games, man. They just keep rolling it up. And when their back's against the wall, they know how to produce in the last. Good teams will find a way to win these close games. And Lincoln Riley's installed confidence in this team.
And what about your other team in LA?
Yeah, I like
big
Chip
win over
Kelly,
Washington
man.
last week. Who wins
Bring
that?
those Utes. Come on, bring those Utes to the Rose Bowl. We'll show you how to play football.
That's your marquee matchup in the Pac-12 this week is going to be Utah at UCLA. Can Chip Kelly's team continue to roll?
I'm telling you right now, I'm throwing it out there. I think UCLA is going to beat these guys. That showdown the following week with USC might not be. They're not going to survive. Utah will not survive UCLA and USC in the 2 coming weeks.
Alan says that USC will have a test with Washington State. I kind of agree with you here. I think Washington State's going to get. I think USC will win this game handily. Myself,
yep.
Washington State's better, but I don't think they're going to stand up to USC this week.
No, especially in USC's backyard. I just think USC is too strong for them. And the only thing I can say, and Alan brings up an interesting point, you don't want to look too out and past Washington State because then you go to Utah the following week.
Yeah, and Utah's not done here in the Pac-12. And they've been playing very good football since they went to Florida and lost, which that loss looks worse and worse every time Florida takes the field, it seems. But Utah's still got a chance to play their way back up the rankings and have been. I think this is probably a 3-team race between UCLA, USC, and Utah. I think Oregon, as well as they've been playing recently.
Can we have an undefeated? I mean, hey, Keith, how great would this be? And I'm not a big LA guy, but how great would this be? USC and UCLA both undefeated, playing the second to the last week of the season in the Rose Bowl.
For the Pac-12 to go to the Pac-12 championship. That'd be great for football. Now,
it reminds me of that one year when they were both pretty high ranked, and I think, if I'm not mistaken, UCLA pulled a shocker on USC.
That brings up a good point. I mean, UCLA plays their home games in the Rose Bowl, but they're averaging about 25,000 people at those games too. I mean, how come people are not supporting this UCLA team, and they haven't really for a while? Is it because of and again, LA people get this moniker that they're front runners. So if UCLA were to continue to win, the crowd will come to see them, but they're only going to support really good teams.
Well, you're absolutely right. And I know Halloween comes around once a year, but I think everybody's dressing as an empty chair. When you look at this thing, I mean, they're saying
Washington. This game against Washington, it was only like 37,000 people there.
They say 37,000, but if you walked around and took you might find 37 people.
Where are
I
these
mean,
people? I mean, is UCLA to really be considered a power in football? Now they're going to the Big Ten in a couple of years. Do they need to build a stadium on campus
well,
or near campus?
I will tell you this, and I'm going to side with UCLA and the fans on this one. Gas is $7 a gallon out here. You know, you sit in traffic while you're idling that thing. So I mean, you could spend $50 to park and $135 to get down there from wherever destination you're coming in from. So maybe Gavin Newsom's going to lower this gas tax or put a strain on some of these oil companies because $7 is, keeping people coming to the games, I would imagine.
Well, if you want somebody to do something against big business, I mean, Gavin Newsom be your guy, I think. So I wouldn't worry about that. California football fans have died out. Even the Rams fans have what does that say? In the tens of hundreds. What the tens of hundreds?
Yeah. Are the Rams relevant? If I went up to San Francisco, I don't even know if people knew the Rams existed. They've been beaten by a drum by those guys 7 straight. So that's another topic we can bring up Sunday too. I don't know if the Rams have been exposed.
I'm going to ask for your pick in a couple of games before we do our locks and don't be surprised. So let me pull a couple of games out here that I think are really relevant games. Good games this week. TCU.
Who's the worst handicapper? Me or your great granddaughter there? Your beautiful granddaughter Scarlett.
My great granddaughter. Jesus, how old do you think I am?
I'm putting her on a pedestal.
I know I'm looking old these days, but I'm not. I'm only 62. I'm not 102.
I didn't put great grandfather. I made sure I put great.
Oh, great. Oh, I see. I get it. I'm going to throw Tennessee at LSU. Interesting. LSU playing better football than we would have expected. What do you think in this game?
I like Tennessee. I'm not really sold. I mean, on Brian Kelly. I really ain't.
I like Tennessee a lot.
I like Tennessee on this game. They're making strides. I like the way they're coming together. Yeah, I like Tennessee. I just don't care for Brian Kelly. Never did, but that's a story for another show.
TCU at Kansas.
Oh, you got to break out the Kansas gear, man. The Jayhawks, man. This is college game days there. They're not losing.
This is the biggest upset of the day, by the way. Forget it. We're running out of time anyway. Let's get right to our locks. Give me your lock.
Well, my lock is going to be Alabama taking Texas A&M out. Most watched game this week. Everybody's going to have eyes on it. This is like a pay-per-view. That's my lock. Alabama ain't losing. Don't be surprised.
Yeah.
Don't be surprised. And I said this last week, and people laughed at me. When UCLA beat Washington, don't be surprised if UCLA takes down Utah.
Okay, there's a good pick. I'm going to stay away from. I'm going to say, here's my lock. TCU goes into Lawrence, Kansas, with game day there in front of Corso. If Corso's there, I hope Lee Corso's okay. Couldn't make it last week because he had a little spell, was in the hospital. We hope Lee Corso's doing well. Right in front of the game day crowd and everybody else, and puts a beating on Kansas and kind of takes the air out of their balloon. That's my lock. My surprise is going to be. I've been wavering here. Here's my surprise. Iowa State takes the wind out of Kansas State's sails after a couple of really big wins by Kansas State. I think Iowa State back to the wall. Matt Campbell, starting to feel a little bit of heat after, he's one of the guys always mentioned for these big jobs as well. Hasn't done
any
a lot.
Any relation to Dan Campbell breaking kneecaps in New England this week?
I don't believe so, but I don't think any kneecaps will be broken in New England. Because we can't afford any more injuries, by the way.
Yeah, I'm just hoping.
My upset will be Iowa State beats Kansas State.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one. There's some great games, man. We'll find out if Pitt can bounce back and beat Virginia Tech.
Ew, Bama versus Texas Tech. What's that? They're not playing Texas Tech. They're playing Texas A&M.
Yeah. Yeah, you got to get the Texas schools right.
Cowboy. I don't get into
God.
Jayhawks versus the Horns. Yes, it's going to be the Horned Frogs beating the Jayhawks. Everybody knows the Horned Frogs win. Mark, give us a quick. What do you got going on this week? Give us a quick thing as we head out.
XM 203, Sirius 217. We're in Philly tomorrow with Mark Heffernan, I believe, coming through that show. And another great guest, I know Marianne has it, with Sal and everybody. And then Friday, I'll finish up my second year in a row with Tarek Brock and the Pittsburgh Pirates podcast. God, I hated to see them lose 100 last night, but good things coming for next year.
Next year, only 99. Don't worry about it. Mark, great to have you with us, guys. You guys have been a great group again today. Great comments, keeping the show rolling. Love it. We'll see you right here next week. Have a great week of college football. It starts tomorrow night, right through Saturday. Have a great week. We'll see you next week. Keith Engel for TGI Sports Talks College Football Huddle. Have a good one. Bye-bye.